Negligence in counseling, but also negligence in Islamic counseling. Both of them are very similar, but I think you will learn very quickly that negligence from Islamic perspective gives to it a new spin, spiritual and religious spin. From the perspective of what is it that's going on here in this life, this materialistic life, but also what is it that's going to happen for you if you continue being neglected in the life after. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So neglect from the orthodox, mainstream, generic perspective refers really to safety. Yeah, it is part of my ethical framework as a practitioner of counseling and psychotherapy and psychologist to look out for the sign of neglect. People who come to me, they might suffer severe neglect, and it is my job to listen to it. Some of them, they're not even aware of it. So they might have attachment issues, feelings of isolation, anxiety, and depression. And what lies underneath is that they've been seriously neglected as a child. And by neglect, right? By neglect, we don't want to misunderstand anything here. So we're talking about something that has happened to you from others, probably significant others, such as partners or such as your primary caregivers. And we're talking about different levels of neglect, so physical, educational, emotional, medical as well. And they can vary in forms and shapes and length as well, in terms of how long you've been under these circumstances. So in terms of physical neglect, we are considering failure to provide necessities such as food, shelter, clothing, safety, and medical care. In terms of educational neglect, we're talking about failure to ensure that you in a school age, you actually had access to schooling. Even if you are homeschooled, you want to make sure that you had appropriate resources and exposure to age-appropriate knowledge. Now, in terms of emotional neglect, we're talking about failure to attend to psychological and emotional needs of your carers. In terms of medical neglect, we're talking about disallowing you to access necessary medical treatment recommended by professionals. And by other types of neglect, we normally refer to lack of something. So we can talk also about physical neglect from the perspective of lack of resources, access, or being denied resources to maintain your basic materialistic needs, such as, I don't know, paying for bills or being fit to clothe yourself. In terms of self-neglect, we're talking about failure of probably seniors and adults who have special needs to meet their physical, psychological, emotional needs because their finance is being under somebody else's management. And in terms of abandonment, we're talking about failure to fulfill caregivers' duties. So that falls this time on the caregivers, so parents and maybe adults who are responsible for adults. Now, how we deal with it in mainstream therapy, we either specialize in trauma-informed care, and that includes a specific training, but also specific assessments and specific tasks. We can also invite clients into group therapies where they learn effective ways to deal with whatever is residual in their memory and in their behaviors, and learn that it is not only them, like they have a chance to not only see therapists, but also learn from other people's experience. Group therapy can be very, very effective because of that. We also have family therapy, especially structural, when you meet with therapists and your family members to demystify and make it open to awareness of everyone. What is it that everyone made out of particular behavior or particular period in their life? We're talking also about art therapy here, because it's very sensitive. The work with possible neglect, we sometimes bury it under the surface for such a long time. It's not on the surface. So sometimes through creativity, you want to tap into it and try heal it. Okay. Now, from Islamic perspective, and I think it's really relevant to spiritual interventions as well, what I'm going to say, we see neglect for everything that I just said, but also we consider more. We consider spiritual as well as religious aspects of our well-being, our afia. So if we just about to concentrate on Islamic counseling and we want to go back to the source, which is Quran, we probably want to realize that there are as many as probably 35 verses mentioning neglect. And what we can learn from this neglect in Quran is that actually we're talking about negligence, we're talking about ignorance, we're talking about error, forgetfulness, and we're talking about arrogance, as well as we might talk about something that comes up very often, heedlessness. Okay, and there are probably two ways that Quran talks about negligence, and it's divided into excused and condemned, meaning accordingly to intentions, to niyyah, right? What else we want to know as a practitioners and as a client accessing Islamic counseling and Islamic psychology about neglect is also the fact that Sharia has specific laws. We're not going to cover them in that short videos about it. So it's, in a sense, what I'm saying is it's already being covered. But let's stay just with Quran. And Quran talks about, yes, rights of children, rights of parents as well, rights of women, rights of men, rights of orphans, how to not neglect them, how to maintain justice. But also Quran talks about the fact that we by nature, we neglect ourselves. We neglect our religious duties, we neglect our familiar duties, and we neglect our duty to our Lord and our duty to ourselves. We are really important. Our self-growth is absolutely paramount accordingly to teachings of Quran. And you find very similar notions in prophetic traditions. For instance, Prophet Luqman, alayhi salam, we know that he was giving many advices to his beloved sons. He loved his sons so much. He wanted to leave them with the best advice, how to create the adab, meaning character. And what he said that is that the signs of neglect, oblivion, that's how he called it, is 4 things. And he said blindness, wrongdoing, acting, and forgetting the truth. So this is very profound. Blindness, we're talking about spiritual blindness and moral and ethical blindness, wrongdoing, being in habit of committing sins, religiously speaking, but from psychological point of view, we're probably talking about being in a maladaptive circle of life, right? And that might also include the way you think, because the way you think will influence the way you behave. And he said acting as well, so your behavioral intelligence is really important. Remember, amal, 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 meaning action, 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 behavior, behavior, act, 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 constantly coming up in Quran. And then he says, forgetting the truth. So what is that truth? That truth is that we are here only for temporary time, and whatever we do will be taken with us like a luggage, right? Will be taken with us on the day of Akhirah. So when you work with your Islamic client, or when you work with your Islamically inspired therapist, you would probably notice that not only your physical, mental, and financial, so forth rights are going to be scanned as it were, but also you are going to be taking into responsibility for how much are you taking yourself to accountability, and how much you're looking after your own truth. And your own truth is beyond psychological from Islamic perspective. It's also spiritual, meaning how much you remember God when you act, how much do you remember God when you think, how much do you remember God when you see, how much do you remember God when you work on your memory. So Quran being that that probably instruction for life, says to us in many verses and warns us how to protect ourselves from heedlessness, and how heedlessness is harmful for you because it causes that self-neglect. So let's talk about Surah Araf, verse 205. And do not be one of those who are heedless, okay? And then let's go back to Yunus. What do we learn from Surah Yunus? Well, we learn that he mentioned, this surah mentions about people who behave contrary to what Yunus expected, meaning he was there performing dawah, but he wasn't really listened to. He was absolutely not accepted. And what we learn from this surah, from the perspective of neglect, is about how profound neglect can be on people. Meaning he left his post. The pressure was so much, the heedlessness, the self-neglect was so much that his heart couldn't take it, and he physically left his post of the prophethood, right? So in the same way, if you are a therapist, don't leave your post. Use different devices like dua, like supervision. Don't give up on your client if they continue to self-neglect themselves from spiritual point of view, okay? All our people, you are in ignorance of this, but you are your own oppressors, and that is Surah of Prophets and Nabiyah, verse 97. So what we learn about negligence from Holy Quran and from Sharia is more than just basics or psychology. We also know that negligence has profound effect on your spirituality and on your welfare here and in hereafter. And that is the job of your Islamic counselor, who sits with you and sort of try to realign you with your truth. I hope that was useful. If you want to know more about your truth, why don't you revisit my session about fitra? That should put more light on it. Okay, it was lovely to see you. Don't forget to sign to my YouTube channel, AJ's Therapy. All right, I see you next video, inshallah. And for now,